Hello, everybody. I guess we have a group here of people who are used to doing design. But you're probably used to doing design of one thing, and then another thing, and then another thing. Well, I'm going to talk to you about something much bigger, about a design task that's a collective task, that's a social task. We're going to talk about designing the future of the information age. And in order to do that, I'm going to take advantage of the fact that I am a student of history, a student of technological revolutions. So we're going to learn from that today. The first thing I want to tell you is something that most people don't realize, because it only happens maybe to 1 or 2 generations in a century. And that's a task that this generation has. And it's that society does shape its future by understanding the potential of each technological revolution and designing how it will be deployed, understanding its nature, and deciding whether it's going to be for the few or for the many. As of now, we're still having technology for the few. We've got to change it and move it towards being for the many. Now, what technological revolutions are processes of what Schumpeter called creative destruction. You understand that, no? Creative destruction, so that the new, in order to emerge, in order to establish itself, needs to get rid of the old. And that's not easy, because lots of people love the old. And we've got to be able to learn to love the new. It's much easier for the young. The young are just born into loving the new. But all of us, oldies, we're not used to that. And lots of other people have made their success, their lives, using what used to be the new, but it's no longer new. It's now obsolete. Because, in fact, each revolution declares the obsolescence of the previous one at every level. So we have new ways of working, new ways of organizing, new ways of communicating, new ways of living. And that, in fact, that's actually obvious. Everybody realizes that these changes are happening. What we don't all realize is that the final direction that's taken from what is actually a very wide range of the possible with each revolution is a socio-political choice. But we don't always know this, because, as I told you, it happens only once, maybe twice in a century. So people are not used to knowing that we've got to make that choice. So we are talking about the fact that it's your turn to shape the information revolution. It so happens that this is one of those rare moments when a generation has the opportunity of shaping not only its future, but the future of quite a few more people, because it'll be like for at least 40 or 50 years ahead. Now I'm going to show you some history so you understand why, and why it only happens every so often. There have been 5 technological revolutions in the past 250 years or so. The first one is, of course, the Industrial Revolution in England from the end of the 18th century. Machines, factories, canals. Canals were the internet of the time. It was really astonishing that you could communicate across rivers, across the whole country, by using these waterways. Then, from about 1829, we have the age of steam, coal, railways, and mechanization. Some years later, from 1875, we have the age of steel and heavy engineering, electrical, chemical, civil, naval. That was actually the first globalization, because we had transcontinental railways, we had telegraph that went across continents and across the oceans, we had steamboats that went north and south and made it possible to have a global market in food, because in 2 weeks you could go from Argentina to England, or from New Zealand, or from India, right across from Australia, across the Suez Canal very quickly. So we had this incredible, as astonishing as now, globalization at the time. Then we come to something we know a little better. the age of the automobile, oil, petrochemicals, and mass production since Ford's Model T in 1908. And finally, our own age, the age of information technology and telecommunications. But you will see that the arrow is only halfway. And that's the point. That's what I'm going to tell you today. We are exactly halfway along. Not in terms of time. It could be that the first half is longer than ever this time, and that this moment could be longer than ever. But basically, in terms of diffusion, we are halfway along this particular revolution. And each of these revolutions brings a major paradigm shift. It changes the way we think. It changes the direction for innovation and for organization across the economy and society. So we are in the middle. What does that mean? History shows that each revolution goes through two different periods. We have a bubble prosperity with a recession in the middle, and then a golden age prosperity. So let's look at each of those revolutions in those two halves. And that time, we had, in the first one, we had the Canal Mania, then the Canal Panic, and then we have the Great British Leap. The Railway Mania ended in the Railway Panic, and after that, we had the Victorian boom, that golden age. Then we had several London-funded global booms all over in Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, Argentina, US, everywhere. And after that, the Belle Epoque. The Roaring Twenties were followed after quite a few years of depression in the 1930s, plus the World War. We had the post-war golden age, when in all the Western countries, workers achieved middle-class standards of living. And we have just seen the dot-com boom, which crashed in 2000, the global casino, which crashed in 2008, and now we are in that recession turning point, at that moment in between the sort of good times for finance, not necessarily so good for people, which are basically led by finance. We're going towards a time which should be led by production and the state if they take over, and we are still in that turning point, at that moment when society decides which way it's going to go with the revolution. We might still have another crash, so be prepared. But we might, if we're intelligent enough, if we understand what's going on, if we decide to do it, we could have a sustainable global golden age, when maybe the whole world will advance the way the Western democracies did with the mass production revolution before. So the opportunity we have ahead is absolutely fantastic. The adequate historical parallel that means for today is the 1930s. We are in the equivalent of the 1930s if we look at the pattern of previous technological revolutions. So we're at the turning point. So what does that really mean? What is the nature of that turning point? Why call it a turning point? Well, because as in the 1930s and now, we have structural unemployment, de-skilling, hopelessness, inequality. Actually, this whole thing of structural unemployment, some countries, the US and the UK, are claiming full employment. But behind those figures, there's a lot of gig economy, a lot of zero-hours contracts, a lot of labor force non-participation, people who have dropped out, don't believe they can do. It's really not exactly a real full employment like in the 60s or something like that. We also have casino finance, low investment in the real economy, except for the big FANGs, you know. They are investing a lot because they have so many profits and they don't pay taxes, so they can do whatever they want with going to the moon or doing whatever else, being eternal, never dying or something, all those crazy dreams. Anyway, we also have feeble growth, social unrest, and especially populist messianic leaders. Why? Because there are so many people that are unhappy, they're desperate, and these guys offer heaven or being happy once again. and they have a big following. And of course, we have xenophobia. It could be the Jews or the Muslims or the Mexicans. We have economic migrations, talk of secular stagnation. By the way, the first time that term was used was precisely in the 1930s. We have recessions, even depression. All those horrible things are happening, and yet there is a huge technological potential underlying all that. But it lacks a clear synergistic direction. It's the same as in the 1930s. In the 1930s, there was no, high unemployment, all those things I'm telling you about. And the range of the possible is so great that we had, in the 30s, we had Hitler, we had Stalin, and we had the Keynesian democracies about to emerge in that global golden age. So the space, the possibilities are enormous. The range is very, very wide. And that's how we have to choose. Now, the direction for golden ages is defined by two features. An active state, tilting the playing field. You know this whole thing about an even playing field? Yeah, even, but tilted. The same for everybody, but tilted in favor of the good things. So you need a clear path for profitable innovation, which at the same time has sufficient demand and at the same time reduces inequality and creates employment. And then we have the emergence of a new lifestyle, a new aspirational good life, and lots of new jobs to cater to it. These two features determine wealth creation and determine life opportunities. If they're both there, that means there will be plenty of possibilities for creators, for jobs, for things, for investors, for innovators, the whole thing. That is what history has shown in each of the golden ages. Now, I mentioned lifestyles. Why are they so important? It's because they determine the preferred direction for innovation, and they replace the jobs precisely eliminated by the revolution. I'll show you an example. In the post-war golden age, we had, the Roaring '20s, the 1930s, then the World War, and then between 1950 and 1970 in the US, manufacturing production, which was, of course, the one that used the mass production advantages of high productivity, tripled, but employment only grew by 28%. Tripled, with only 28% increase. So where did we get the jobs from? From government and trade, services, construction, transport, utilities, real estate, insurance, and finance. Why? Because all policies were there to create suburbanization, cheap houses on cheap land, affordable by people who are on salaries, with generally giving the banks insurance, government, public insurance for mortgage payments, plus unemployment insurance, which guaranteed that even if people lost their job for 4 or 5 months, they could continue paying not only the mortgage, but also the car and the refrigerator and all the other appliances and all the rest and their kids' school. So jobs didn't necessarily come from the revolutionary industries. They came from the way the socio-political choice made life. Of course, there was also the Cold War, and there were also other ways of doing innovation and creating jobs. But basically, it was the shaping that made sure that everybody had the possibility of having a good life. In the advanced world, of course, the developing world didn't get that chance. But let's look at the past. In the Victorian Golden Age, we had something very similar. If we see manufacturing, the red line, that's manufacturing, basically textiles, machinery, and all that. Then we had agriculture losing employment. We had railways and mining increasing slowly, a little bit. And then look, That's all the services that had to do with the urban way of life at the time of the Victorian boom. So what they do, these lifestyles that become the general thing, that become accepted by everybody, is to determine also the quality of life, not only to create the jobs. So let's take a look at a few of them. So each golden age enables a different lifestyle and creates new jobs. So we have the age of steam, coal, iron, railways, and mechanization, the Victorian boom. It was urban Victorian living, different from country aristocracy. And of course, they had manufactured things like textiles and pottery, but everything else was handmade. Everything else was crafts, services, and so on. Tons of it. And you can see, everything had little designs, everything was embroidered, everything. They had clutter, clutter, clutter. We cannot imagine in these times of minimalist design that looked beautiful to them. Then we go to the first globalization. That was cosmopolitan living in the Belle Epoque. Everybody was traveling all over the world, and therefore you did have industrial electricity, the paint, the materials, various things, but people had carpets, objects of art from all over the world. And lots, of course, they kept all the craft things from before, so they were still embroidering and doing all these things and doing ironwork, grills and things. But they also had lots of new jobs in services and entertainment. It was the time of the music halls, the restaurants, the clubs. There was a lot of outside entertainment. Everybody was looking for theater, newspapers. Everybody was in this looking out to the world for entertainment, and that created enormous amounts of jobs. Advertising was then born. Lots of posters. Designers were in their heyday. It was a wonderful time. And then we come to something that to some of us might look very boring, the suburban family living of the mass production era. All had to be manufactured. Anything that was handmade was just not good. Everything had to be made, preferably plastic. And there were plenty of new jobs, as we just saw, in construction, in services, in all sorts of things, but crafts disappeared. Everything handmade was sort of not good. Manufactured, perfect, straight. That was the thing. And of course, entertainment was no longer out in the music halls, it was in the home. The family sitting around the TV set. It was the radio while you were cooking. It was the records. Everything was like brought inside the home so that the family was the unit of consumption as at the same time as a way of living. Well, today, what could we do? Smart, green lifestyles. Smart, green, possibly sharing lifestyles. That could unleash a full employment society. And it doesn't have to stop from using artificial intelligence or robotics. All this fear, robotics, artificial, of course, we need that. We need that for high productivity. That's what produces the wealth with which to pay well the people who do the things that have lower productivity, because every society tries to even out relatively the salaries of the high productivity and low productivity activities. But if you don't have the high productivity ones, you don't have the money with which to fund the others. So we're interested in having both. So what do we want? An aspirational good life with less energy, less materials, more ICT, and more jobs. So let's look at some of the things that create jobs. Human-centered services, health and care, leisure and sports, entertainment, mobility and distribution, diversified electricity, an education industry. We need to learn all sorts of things throughout our lives. So we need it to become like a consumption thing, investment and consumption, the whole education thing, and lots of investment in teaching. The arts, of course, a wide range for that. Intermediation between computers and people, sharing and barter, conservation, logistics, maintenance. We have to bring back maintenance because we have to stop this planned obsolescence silliness. We need durable goods and probably to rent them and then, to buy them like we do buy used books in Amazon, and to also be able to have chips that will tell you what the history of each product is, and then also probably 3D printing of parts. Maybe we don't have to stock parts ever again. We just 3D print the ones that we need for upgrading or for maintenance. So we have other jobs in resource recovery, recycling, and reuse, pollution reduction, of course, and so on. I mean, that whole range of things. Then we have the modernization of production, which also requires jobs and requires innovation. The circular economy, truly durable goods, the products, as we just said, with 3D printing, with a rental model, nanotechnology. The rental model could actually employ thousands and thousands of maintenance workers, installation workers, diagnosing workers. Nanotechnology, renewable energy, batteries and carbon capture, new construction methods, bioplastics, so that we don't have to have this plastics problem if we can make them from biodegradable things, custom materials, fiber to the home, Wi-Fi infrastructure, a smart electrical grid for cars and also for the use, buy and sell electricity from the home, complex systems engineering, hydroponics and urban agriculture. I mean, it's ridiculous. We need the development of the underdeveloped world, but we don't need to bring salads from Kenya all the way to England every day, which is what's happening today. We must be able to get Kenya to do something else and to get things to be done around the city so we don't do this madness. So, and so on, and so on, and so on. And there are many more. So we can have massive innovation and massive employment in sustainable activities enhanced and enabled by ICT, while also using robotics and artificial intelligence. We don't have to fear that. What we fear is the incapacity to create the other jobs which are associated with both the environment and the good living. That means that government policy and business strategies, because it isn't just government, they need to accelerate the shift in lifestyles. We've got to all recognize the direction we need to go in and then start doing the policies and the strategies to get them there. And of course, we know the new lifestyle is already being adopted by the rich, by the educated, and the young. You all know that because that's, everything I said is what you do. So, what is it? What's the direction? Well, to go from the mass production revolution to the ICT digital revolution, we reverse the direction of innovation. If it used to be that we turned every service into a product, we used to have laundries where people worked and washed clothes and you would take them there. Well, now with mass production, we got a washing machine, so we would do it at home. And that's how everything, the theater, music, everything turned into a product, a record, or a tape. So now we go from products to services, which is what we have done with music by streaming and what we've done with films and with books and so on. We go from tangible to intangible, from possession to access, thinking of sharing and rental, from passive to active, from plastic to natural, from processed to fresh, from identical to customized, from centralized to distributed in networks and platforms. Do you recognize it all? Well, that's it. But we've got to have the whole society doing it. Sustainable production and living must be made cheaper, more profitable, more accessible, and especially more desirable for everybody. And then we start moving, because that tells innovators in which direction to go. And we must also redesign institutions for quality of life services in several major areas. Which are they? Healthcare. We need personal and personalized healthcare in community, plus online and remote healthcare. Nutrition, new sources, maybe insects, maybe all sorts of other things. Less meat, less sugar, less processed food. In education, flexible education, multi-directional, self-managed, lifelong. Transport, energy saving, new vehicles, cycling. Could we bring back dirigibles? Housing, sharing, new rental models, sustainability, completely different designs, and possibly optimal cell design for cities so that we can have in very small spaces and people who can move from one city to another, because we're going to be, in this platform, in these portfolio careers, people are moving also places, so you need to be able to easily move from one place to the other and to live in very small places, the young people to share and so on, but comfortable and beautiful. Creativity. We need to make creativity a generalized thing, that everybody somehow engages, indulges in creativity. So we need enabling spaces and conditions and new forms of funding for the serious ones. Leisure, experiences, participation, digital, active communities. So it's going to require as much imagination and boldness as shown by the designers of the welfare state. They did a fantastic job. We better study what they did, because what we need to do now, it's going to be big. And we also need to reinvent the social safety net to serve the gig economy and the self-employed, as well as the unemployed. Is somebody working for Uber employed or unemployed? Is a self-employed person employed or unemployed? Is a 0 hours contract person employed or unemployed? They are both neither. There's something else, and we need to have a safety net that serves them both, that serves them all. Should we establish universal basic income? It's very controversial. I support it very strongly. I really think it's the big solution, as long as it's just a cushion. Anyway, something we could discuss. Job guarantees by and for the community, that's another option. Financial services for irregular income flows. I mean, people who earn incomes like that should be able to have a financial service that evens their income. They pay interest when they're under, and they receive interest when they're above, and the whole thing. For thousands and thousands, it could make it much easier than the complexities now and the use of very uncomfortable forms of credit. Because the current unemployment insurance system is obsolete, like many of the other policies. I know I'm talking in a country that's one of the most advanced, and you probably don't realize how obsolete the system can be in other countries. So perhaps you're very lucky, but many of you are not from Switzerland, so. And we also need to redesign the tax system. Obviously, for fairness. We need a financial transactions tax, because all these people that are taking their money into the tax havens, including here, need to pay. They have to pay when they move their money, so that societies that are making their wealth will receive some of the credit. You know, capitalism, the legitimacy of capitalism, depends on the fact that a few that are very greedy and make a lot of money benefit the many. If they don't, then it's not legitimate. Do we need global taxes? If we have global companies and we have global finance, we should have global taxes, because otherwise we don't catch them as they escape. Should we discourage short-termism? Yes, taxes should be such that they're very high in short term and they're very low if you keep something, if you keep any stock or any investment for a long term, you should pay less than if you just do it within a day or financial in microseconds. And we also should change taxes for sustainability. We should tax energy, materials, and transport instead of taxing value added, which is actually labor and profits. What we need is a systemic set of policies that tilt the playing field towards a positive sum game between business and society, and between society and the environment. Designing the future of the information age will not be easy, and making it socially and environmentally sustainable is the challenge of this generation. It's your challenge. Thank you.